Ryan Clark sent a warning to the NFL on Lamar Jackson, and it's a good one for the Baltimore Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome in to the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, it is OTA day. The Ravens kick off their OTAs today. Of course, they are voluntary, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion about whether Lamar is there, other players there. And if you're listening to this after the OTAs happen or after we figure that out, then you can say if I'm right or wrong in the comments. I always love that kind of thing. So we'll talk about OTAs in the final part of the show. The second part of the show, Ryan Clark compared the Ravens and the Steelers a little bit, and I definitely want to dive into that conversation. But in the first part of the show, Ryan Clark sent a warning to the NFL about Lamar Jackson, and it's a good one for the Baltimore Ravens. So we will start there. Ryan Clark on Get Up, he talked about Lamar Jackson and the Ravens and this, that, and the other. And he said, quote, "We went into this offseason with this criticism or this scrutiny of whether or not Lamar Jackson was going to be there. It was about the collective on this team. It's about Declan Doyle understanding I'm a first-time play caller. The more experienced person, the more accomplished person, and what they're doing is Lamar Jackson. Let's make this collaborative. And when you allow a QB to invest in who your team is, he will invest in the rest of the players." And that's exactly what we're seeing out of Baltimore, and that could be scary for opposing teams. And I like that Ryan Clark said this. I like that, he took this angle on Lamar Jackson here because, yes, Lamar Jackson has been in the league now for a number of years as an MVP level quarterback. I mean, that started during his first full season starting is the starting quarterback of this team. So when you're looking at that, and obviously, look, everybody was wondering, oh, is Lamar going to show up to the offseason program, this, that, and the other? And yes, he does. And look at the buy-in from Lamar Jackson. He's getting credit for it. Some conversations got really weird with him in that, but for the most part, like we talked about it on the show, it was huge that Lamar was there. It set the tone for the rest of his teammates. And actually, Damian Woody on Get Up, he said, quote, "When your best player is bought in, it's easy for the other players underneath him to really buy in as well. And when you have your QB part of the process and hiring the head coach, now he's fully invested in the fact that Lamar Jackson has been there since day one, participating, learning the new offense with Declan Doyle. I think those are the things in the offseason that people don't even talk about during the season." And he meant that in the way of like the little things, right, that add up and mean something. At least that's what I got of it. So again, with Lamar and the OTA conversation and all that stuff, I mean, look, there have been reports, just Rebecca the Athletic talked about it a little bit where he's like, look, Lamar, the relationship with the Ravens is good, this, that, and the other. We talked about that on a show. I believe that was I can't even keep track of the days anymore. I'm pretty sure that was last week. We talked about that. But, that's been the indication. It's like Lamar's been there. He has a good relationship, he's buying in and all this different stuff in terms of the extension talk. Like, I feel like that's just kind of a we'll get there when we'll get there type of thing. I still have confidence it will get done, but at this point, I couldn't tell you when. I mean, there's nothing to really say to me like, oh, there's proof Lamar's not going to sign the deal. Like, there's more in the direction of he will than he won't, but we wouldn't know that until officially it happens. But at the end of the day, I do think the message here is like, look, you have a quarterback that's bought in. It's a new coaching staff. It's a younger offensive coordinator. And it's about the collaborative effort, like Ryan Clark said, about, hey, this is what we've done here. This is what's worked for us. And this is what hasn't, if we're talking about Lamar Jackson. And then Declan Doyle bringing his ideas to the table and saying, well, okay, let's look at this and let's try it this way. And then you have that. And then on the practice field, you can test some of this out. And, we've heard and we've seen Lamar Jackson be, very interactive during some of these practice sessions where he's like going up to receivers and saying, hey, like, this is what I saw. What did you see? And like making sure that they're on the same page. Like we've had many people on this show talk about that and their observations of Lamar. So again, Lamar is putting in the work here. We have seen that. And even with what Damian Woody said about, when you have actually speaking of the when your best player is bought in, I'm going to play. I still have the clip here, I think, right? Yeah, I do. So Kaji Ismail, who's a former Ravens receiver, Super Bowl champion, we have him on all the time every week as a part of the squad show as well. He talked about his personal story about Peyton Manning being at the program, being at the workouts, showing up, and what that meant for him. And I'm sure the other players on that Colts team he played on. So I've played this clip, I think, once, and then Q told the story on the show, but it is relevant here again. So I do want to play. All right, we're going to roll the clip because I do think it's important.
Mini camp is over with. Talk to some of the guys. It's like, yeah, Peyton, he may or may not, be here next week, but yeah, it's voluntary, so you don't have to worry about it. I was like, all right, bet. I'm not coming. I'm going back down to Florida. I'm going to be working out down in Florida. I'm a veteran. I already know what to do to get my body right. I'm chilling. First week goes by. Into that first week, I get this message. And I'm like, who is this? I had a flip phone. So, oh, yeah, I'm cool because it's a flip phone. Hey, what's up? And it was Peyton. He was like, hey, Q, I was just curious, if it's cool with you, if you could come up and get some throwing and catching in, that'd be really great. I appreciate it. We try to just get some, develop some chemistry and, just let me know if you can make it up. And I was like, hung up the phone. The next call was to the Colts travel person. And I was like, hey, boy, I just got to change the plan. I'm thinking about coming back on up. Yeah. So, could you make those flight arrangements for me? And, make sure that, it's either the emergency aisle or, I don't mind emergency window. That'd be good. So just like that, I'm like, Peyton Manning, he called. We're going. Chemistry. And the first game was against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I wound up having a really strong game, had 2 touchdowns. We beat Jacksonville, but it was that early on chemistry that was developed and just getting an understanding of what he liked or didn't like that I think made the difference.
So I think Q's story, again, it has relevance here about the fact that, Lamar Jackson's your leader. Obviously, he's not the vocal, Roquan Smith, Ray Lewis, middle of the huddle type of guy, but obviously him leading by example in being there. I don't really know what attendance during the voluntary OTAs, what it's going to look like, whether everybody shows up, most people, some, I don't know. I mean, we're going to have to see that. Of course, we'll probably get our first glimpse of that here today. And again, we'll have you covered based off everything that happens. But of course, I'm recording this for 6 a.m. on Monday. So I don't know who's there and who's not at the time of this recording. But again, the point stands about Lamar and Declan Doyle themselves just kind of being in collaboration with one another, figuring things out. And, the story about Lamar being there or not being there does get, I think, a bit dragged out and has been a big storyline for many, many years, where it is important, obviously, but there's less media coverage, I feel like, on the other star quarterbacks like Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. When it comes to these conversations, it feels like there's that microscope on Lamar for it. But again, he is proven so far that he's going to show up. He's going to be there. He understands the importance of the offseason and kind of what this is in terms of the new coaching staff and getting the head start, getting on the same page, and all that is very, very important. So look, all the credit in the world to him. Shout out to Lamar for doing that. And I think that, again, with Lamar kind of having that and being okay, Declan being okay, Lamar, what do you see? What do you see here? And kind of in Ryan Clark's other points about the fact of when you allow a quarterback to invest in who your team is, he will invest in the rest of the players. So, all of that stuff, whether it be Declan Doyle investing, Lamar Jackson investing, everybody's pouring in a little bit here. And I think that collaborative effort, which again is something I do believe that, while Jesse Minter's talked about having the coaching staff get the players as ready as possible, I do think that, the stuff that Jesse Minter has talked about so far, it promotes that healthy environment of, it's not just we're the coaches and you're the players and you're going to do what we say. No, it's about the collaboration. That's what Jesse Minter, I feel like, has stressed in a lot of his answers to stuff. So I'm super pumped to see how this continues to go. Here is, again, another chapter in the new chapter of the Ravens' new era begins. But coming to the second part of the show, we'll talk about what Ryan Clark had to say about the Ravens and Steelers and how they might be going in opposite directions. So stay tuned for it coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure is on you need the right hire. This is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed, sponsored jobs helps reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Moving along, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Monday edition of the show. Thanks so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network. We have you covered with 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage and content twice per day, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday. Plus, we have bonus episodes, instant reactions, watch-alongs, the squad show, and the Everyday Club. So if you want some extra add-on content, links in the description down below, as well as on the Locked On Ravens page on the Locked On website for the Everyday Club. But let's talk about Ryan Clark. We just talked about his comments about Lamar Jackson sending a warning to the NFL, and if everybody does the whole thing, it could be scary for opposing teams. That's the warning. Could be scary with everything. So now we're going to talk about what he had to say about the Ravens and the Steelers and the directions they are heading in. Ryan Clark, again, this on Get Up, said, quote, "It feels like these teams are not only heading in opposite directions, their focus and priorities seem extremely different as well. The Baltimore Ravens are trying to win right now, doing everything they possibly can to maximize on who Lamar Jackson has been and who he is at this point. The Pittsburgh Steelers are waiting on a plus 40-year-old QB to decide if he wants to come back and play with his old coach, who when he left his old coach, he didn't even like. And so to me, Omar Khan, the GM of the Pittsburgh Steelers, has to get more focused on the direction which has always been in Pittsburgh to win Lombardi trophies." And this was obviously before Rodgers signed again with the Steelers. Obviously, he is now back. It's official. And again, I love it as a Ravens guy. For the Steelers, I think it is not smart, but look, I'll take it. I mean, Locked On Ravens hosting as a Ravens guy. I mean, I'm going to take that. But look, again, I think Ryan Clark is correct. And this is something I've been talking about for a while here, was that like, I see the light at the end of the tunnel for the Ravens. I just don't see it that way for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think both teams made the correct decision to move on from their coaches. I think a change was absolutely needed for both teams. I just think that the complacency factor, and it was even worse in Pittsburgh because at least Harbaugh had won playoff games. Like, Tom, I can't even remember last time Tomlin's team won a playoff game. But regardless, they needed to do it. But I just think the Ravens, they got younger. They got innovative. You know, they kind of leaned into the future with their hire, whereas Pittsburgh is just a retread coach, right? And it's a retread quarterback. Like, it's that whole thing where I just think that Baltimore is in a better spot than Pittsburgh because they lean into the future. And they said, hey, this guy's one of the best young up-and-coming candidates in the NFL. And, you know, they obviously interviewed a bunch of candidates. Lamar was involved in the process, you know, this, that, and the other. But in Pittsburgh, I just don't see it with them anymore. I just really don't. I think they made fine moves around Aaron Rodgers. But again, like, who your quarterback is determines a lot. It's not everything, but it determines a lot. And look, we've seen Pittsburgh win games with like Duck Hodges, Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett. Like, these quarterbacks just have no bit, like Russell Wilson, like in bad Russell Wilson, right? He was like okay for Pittsburgh, but, you know, really fell off towards the end of the season that year. But the reason they were able to do that was because their defense was so good. Their defense is just not good right now. At least it wasn't last season compared to what we were used to seeing from like a top 2 Pittsburgh defense. It fell off to a pretty middling unit last season. And again, they made the additions, but I've kind of said this a lot on different platforms and of course here as well, where I just don't trust Pittsburgh to be able to keep up with the game with Lamar Jackson. But I think Cincinnati can, and their defense has improved. So right now, I would pick Cincinnati over Pittsburgh because I just think that with the defense, it's getting older. TJ Watt's another year older. Cam Hayward's another year older. Jalen Ramsey's another year older. Aaron Rodgers is another year older. And I liked the Pittman move. I like them taking Jeremy Bernard. I like them signing Jamel Dean. I think that they made solid other moves, but they should have gone for Kyler and they didn't do it. And again, as a Ravens guy, thank you, Pittsburgh, for not doing that. But Ryan Clark is correct, where it feels like the Ravens are trying to embrace the future, go forth, leave the old era behind, and enter this new one. Whereas the Steelers just feel like they're chasing the same thing, because I think that Mike McCarthy is just Mike Tomlin 2.0 here, where, fine regular season success, you're going to get that most likely, but what's the real ceiling of this team, especially with your quarterback, who I do not see it with Pittsburgh. And that's why I'm so confident in Baltimore winning this division, is that I think, yes, Baltimore had a bad season last year. We can all admit that it was not good, but that's not who they are. I truly believe that was a down season. It was a down year for them. And now for them getting Lamar back full strength and, having a new coaching staff, new game plans, you add in the trenches where you were really weak last season, both offensively and defensively. I think you've done what you're supposed to have done this offseason. And, there's a lot about what the Ravens have done this offseason. Is it good? Is it not? I really liked their offseason. Certainly wasn't perfect, but I think they did a lot of what they needed and set out to do this offseason, which was great. You invested in your trenches offensively and defensively. They needed to do that. So I am extremely confident in Baltimore winning the division this season. My prediction right now as it stands is Baltimore 1, Cincinnati 2. And then you have Pittsburgh 3, Cleveland 4. I think a competitive division. I'm not sitting here saying Pittsburgh is going to go 4-12 or whatever, 4-13. But, at the end of the day, I feel like with Baltimore, they have still a core that is in its prime, that can do its thing. And for the Steelers, they're just kind of trying to fight off a rebuild. And, for a team that won the division last season in Pittsburgh, not convincingly, by the way, it feels like, at least to me, they do need to embrace the rebuild a little bit here. And, they have some solid young pieces, but you also are in kind of no man's land here. And if this is the iteration of your team, why do you keep bringing it back and bringing it back? I mean, at some point, you kind of have to have a down season or two. You have to embrace it for a year or two. And I feel like Pittsburgh just hasn't done that yet. And they haven't had anything to show for it. And they're still not going to. I think the Aaron Rodgers move for Pittsburgh is a huge, huge win for the Baltimore Ravens. A huge win for the Ravens. And so Baltimore to me is a division winner. It is not close. And, I think that Ryan Clark is kind of on that train too, right? I mean, at least that's what I can tell from his comments, where it's you're at the mercy of Aaron Rodgers for the second straight offseason, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, subjecting yourself to it again. And then you have the Ravens, who are maximizing Lamar Jackson. They are trying to win right now. And it feels like Pittsburgh is just trying to hold on for dear life. Can we finally muster the magic? And it's just no, I do not think you can muster the magic. Just got to embrace the rebuild here. But they haven't done that. And, every year they push that down the line is another year wasted. And so I think that does benefit Baltimore. But again, the game is played on the field, not on paper. So we'll see. But again, I'm pretty confident that the division will shake out. Baltimore 1, Cincy 2, Pittsburgh 3, and Cleveland 4. But coming to the final part of the show, we'll talk a little bit about the OTA situation in Baltimore right now, kind of where the roster stands as we enter it here. And of course, all we don't know, at least at the time I'm recording this, who showed up, what's going on in OTAs. We will, of course, have you covered with that later on. We're going to talk about some other stuff relating to the OTAs. So be sure to stay tuned when it coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here and every possession matters. If you're looking to get even closer to the action, FanDuel has a great offer to get you started right now. New customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. Turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets just for getting started. I like using FanDuel during the playoffs because everything I need is right there in one place. You can check stats, trends, and matchups before making your picks, which makes the whole experience feel a lot more informed. And over on FanDuel right now, Spurs and Thunder kick off the Western Conference Finals. Right now, the Thunder are 6.5-point home favorites in game one. And I do like them at that number. The Thunder seem impossible to stop right now. Head over to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Continuing on, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Monday edition of the show. Thanks again for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day here. We have that 5-day a week plus more daily Ravens coverage for you, Monday through Friday, plus all the other content we have. And if you have a friend or a family member who's a Ravens fan and wants some daily Ravens coverage or content, be sure you send them here our way on Locked On Ravens. We'll have them covered just like we have you covered. And you can also follow me on social media at CashTracker34 on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the whole 9 yards. But all right, let's talk a little OTAs here. Again, the Ravens kick off OTAs today. They'll have 3 this week, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, followed by Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week. And then the week after that, they will have them on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday again. So May 18th through 19th, 21st, 26th through 28th, and then June 1st through 2nd, and then June 4th. So that is where the organized team activities will come into play. So again, I'm just really excited to see where they are right now in terms of team and everything that they have going on for OTAs. Guys who show up, obviously, that'll be important, and that's obviously going to be a big conversation point. But, again, like, it's not a massive, massive deal, but it definitely is a lot more important this offseason when it comes to new coaching staff, lots of new faces. But again, like, a lot of the guys have been in the building, apparently, based off of everything. So that's at least a start of a good sign here. And, I'm not really sure what to expect. I guess it's kind of like a day-by-day thing in terms of like standouts and what they're working on and this, that, and the other. But, it's just you get closer and closer to the regular season. And, the more reps you get in, the more time you spend with the coaches, the more times that, players and coaches get to work together, especially when you're trying to feel out each other, it's going to be a huge deal. And that's not going to like excuse all growing pains. Like, stuff is still going to happen. There's still going to be, tough plays early, I feel like, where you're like, all right, you'll get that later in the season. But this is a really good start to it. And I think their roster's in a really good spot as it stands right now as we enter OTAs here. Obviously, you got Lamar at quarterback. You don't need anything else there. You do have Tyler as well as your backup. But running back-wise, Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Adam Randall, Rasheen Ali. I think that's a fine room. If Derrick Henry goes down, I guess Justice Hill and, maybe a combination of Randall and Ali will take the reins there. But, Derrick Henry, he's awesome. So you're set at running back. Not really a fullback this year. It's wide receiver. We'll skip fullback to wide receiver here where you get Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman, Tez Walker, Elijah Surratt, Jacoby Lane, as well as LeJontay Wester. You have tight end wise, Mark Andrews, Durham Smythe, Josh Cuevas, and Matt Hibner. You also have offensive line wise, your starting projected line right now looks like Ronnie Stanley and then John Simpson, center. I could not tell you whether it's Danny Pinter, Javon Gwen, Corey Bullock, Nick Dawkins, et cetera, et cetera. Right guard is Vega Ioane, it looks like. And then, you have the right tackle spot, Roger Rosengarten, a much improved unit despite the uncertainty at center. You have so much depth on the D-line between, we'll just throw Nnamdi in here, even though he hasn't been, at least at the time of this recording, no official updates been announced on him, whether he'll be back or not. But, you throw in Nnamdi, assuming he's back, and then Travis Jones, Clayus Campbell, Aeneas Peebles, John Jenkins, you have so many options there. And even guys like Broderick Washington and TJ Okoye, Rayshon Benny, who they drafted. So lots of options. And then on the edge, you have guys like Trey Hendrickson, Mike Green, other guys as well that can probably step up, like Zion Young in this rookie season. Tavius Robinson, obviously been there, done that. Lisa Isaac as well. So you're stacked up front defensively. Inside linebacker is a little iffy for me with Roquan and Teddy Buchanan, who's coming off his injury. Trenton Simpson, Jay Higgins. They could probably stand to add another vet like they did at the safety spot with Kayvon Wallace, who at safety you have Kyle Hamilton, Jalen Hawkins, Malachi Starks, and Wallace himself. And then at corner, that's another interesting spot. You got obviously your big three, I guess, with Nate Wiggins, Marlon, Humphrey, Chidobe Awuzie. But, you also have other guys like DJ Tampa who can go in there, Chandler Rivers, who they drafted, you also have, I forgot Keandre Jackson is a safety, and then you have Keon Martin as a corner. So again, like all in all, then your specialists are Tyler Loop and then Ryan Eckley and Nick Moore. So like, again, and I put this out on a short on Friday night. I feel like the Ravens roster, if the season were to start today, it would be 1,000% ready. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the roster is perfect. Like, you do probably want to go and invest in another vet center, depending on whether that's trade or free agency and who the options are. But, I still think that if the season started today, they'd be in such a good spot. So OTAs are another stepping stone here. I'm really excited for it. We'll have all the coverage for you as the week rolls along, and any, practice updates, attendance updates, whatever it may be, we'll have it for you here on Locked On Ravens. So I have you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in on the show on the web. Be sure to like and subscribe button in video form, and follow along and subscribe in audio form for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage and content. Coming up, we'll be back here later today with our 6 p.m. edition of the show, followed by the Squad Show at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.